Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be an eyeshadow palette declutter. I'm not going to be physically going through my entire eyeshadow palette collection with you guys, but I do have 10 palettes in my collection that just don't have a place in my collection at all anymore. I never reach for these palettes. I haven't reached for them at all this year, and honestly they're just taking up space, they're adding to like clutter, etc., and I just don't want to keep them around anymore. So I'm going to be going through those 10 eyeshadow palettes with you guys today. If you are interested, then stay tuned. First, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I hope you consider doing so before you go. I post videos every single Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, and without further ado, let's get into the palettes that I'm getting rid of. If you guys watched my 10 least favorite eyeshadow palettes within my collection, some of these probably will come as no surprise to you, but some of them I don't think I mentioned in that video. So starting with number 1, this is my Wet n Wild Nude Awakening palette, and this was going in my 19 Shadows in 2019 project, but I recently switched up the way that I'm doing that project, so I'm not even going to keep this around anymore just for the sake of like showing it during my updates. I did pretty much use up this entire shade right here, but other than that, there's just nothing about this palette that inspires me or makes me want to use this. Also, Wet n Wild has left a bad taste in my mouth just with the things that they've done this year regarding their cruelty-free status. Aside from that, if I liked this palette, I would still try and get use out of it rather than just like decluttering. I will see if I have a friend who wants this, but I just never really was that interested in this palette once I added it to my collection. So I am going to be getting rid of this. Another Wet n Wild palette, this is their old Comfort Zone palette, and I do have the new version, the one that looks like this, and I'm going to keep the one that looks like this and get rid of the old one just because obviously this is old. I know a lot of people say the older, I can't open this. A lot of people say the older formula is better than the newer one. I can't even get this open, so we're just not even going to try. But I'm just going to keep the newer one. I think the newer one has two extra shades. This one has 8, whereas the new one has 10. So I am going to keep that palette, try and use that. I may end up trying to pan that one next year in 2020, like a pan that palette or something along those lines, included in a project pan of some sort. Regardless, I am going to be getting rid of this palette. Okay, this was a tough decision, but I recently moved my beauty space and I moved the way, or I switched up the way that I have my palettes displayed. So I have a little bit less space for my palette display, and I still have a ridiculous amount of palettes. A ridiculous amount of palettes fits in my new space, and I basically got to the point where I ran out of room and I was like, okay, like you need to get it together and get rid of some palettes that you aren't using, because I didn't want to create like a whole another shelf for my palettes. So that being said, I am going to be decluttering my Flower Beauty eyeshadow palette in Golden Natural. This is mostly shimmers. There's like 2 kind of like satin matte shades in here, but the rest are mostly shimmers. This was a fine palette. I think the shimmers are beautiful, and if you don't have a large collection and you just want like a complimentary shimmer palette, I think that this would be a good option. But because I have such a huge eyeshadow palette collection, I have so many shimmers, and oftentimes I'm not wanting to reach into a second palette when the palette that I am like basing my look around probably has a shimmer in it that I can use. So this is just not getting any use from me personally. Again, I'm gonna see if any of my friends want this. Friends, family, sister, Hannah, if you're watching this and you want this, let me know. But this just doesn't have a place in my eyeshadow collection anymore. Again, I don't think that this is a bad palette, but it's just not one that I'm reaching for, therefore I don't want to keep it. Okay, this next palette is another one that I really love and loved and still love, but like I'm never reaching for this anymore. This is the Tartelette Tease palette, and mine has 4 pans in it, and I actually dropped this the other day from pretty high, and this one is gonna fall out. So that was another deciding factor, like this is basically kind of ruined. This was a really good palette, and one that I would recommend if you are just like needing a really quick work palette or one to travel with. This doesn't offer a variety of options. Like you're pretty much left with like 2, 3, maybe 4 eyeshadows or eyeshadow looks that you can create, because you are left with only 6 shades, but you can create wearable everyday looks with this, and I really love this palette for that reason. This was in my 2018 and 2018 project, and my goal is to hit pan on 3 shades during that project, and I hit pan on 4, so I did get a ton of use out of this, but again, I'm just not reaching for this one anymore. I can reach for my Tartelette Tease, I can reach for so many other palettes to create the same look that I can get with this one. So I'm going to be decluttering this one as well. Again, I don't think that this is a bad eyeshadow palette, and these little minis from Tarte are ones that I would recommend, again, especially if you're looking for just like a really easy travel friendly palette that's just going to offer you a couple neutral looks. I think that these are really good, but this just again does not have a place in my collection right now. I'm going to be decluttering both of the Vault palettes that I have from the Morphe Jaclyn Hill Vault collection. First, I have the Bling Boss palette. I mentioned this in my 10 least favorite eyeshadow palette video, that I just didn't think the quality in this was good at all. The shimmers were really hard to work with. Even with a wet brush, I didn't think that they looked good on the eyes. I felt like they made my eyes look creasy and just like older, and I just didn't enjoy this palette at all, and I never reach for this because it's just, in my opinion, not good quality. So I'm gonna be decluttering that. And then the second one that I have here is the Dark Magic palette. Looks like this. This one does have pan in it, mostly because my daughter was playing with this one, and then I have gotten some good use out of this shade right here, which is the shade Mojo, which is just a really deep brown that I used at times to fill in my brows. But other than that, again, I don't think the quality on this was good. I also don't reach for shades like this really ever, so for that reason I really don't have a use for this palette, so this one can go. Next up, from Dose of Colors, I have the Snow Angels palette, and I also mentioned this in my 10 least favorite palettes in my collection. I've never even used this. I bought this just to round out my Dose of Colors 5-pan eyeshadow palette collection, which is not a good reason to purchase an eyeshadow palette. The color scheme in here is just they're not colors that I ever reach for. I mean, I just don't even really like pinks on my eyes. I was gonna say maybe I could reach for the, I don't really like pink eyeshadow on my eyes. So really dumb reason for me to purchase this, and I mean, I haven't reached for it in almost a year, so I don't see myself reaching for this in the near future. I don't see it becoming like a favorite eyeshadow palette, so I don't really see a reason to keep this. This next palette was one that I have decluttered in the past, and then I pulled back in, and I just need to declutter this one. This is the ColourPop Semi Precious palette, and this has 8 different shimmer shades in it, and they are nice shimmer shades, but I just don't really care for all shimmer palettes. Kind of what I was saying earlier is oftentimes whatever eyeshadow palette I'm using to like base my look around probably has a shimmer shade in there that I can use, so I'm never really reaching into one palette just for one shimmer shade, and therefore I'm just not getting any use out of this palette, so this guy can go. I don't think that this is even available anymore. But yeah, I'm gonna be getting rid of that. Another ColourPop palette that I'm gonna be getting rid of is the She palette. Now I think this is a bestseller on the ColourPop website. This was a collab and then they brought it back, and I think it's permanent or it's still available. This is what it looks like, and there are 2 reasons I'm getting rid of this. One, again, I just don't reach or create pink based eyeshadow looks, which is basically my only option when reaching into this palette, so that's just like a personal preference thing. I've also had this for I think really close to 2 years at this point. I picked this up when it first released, and I feel like the quality of mine has digressed. I think digressed is the word I'm looking for. If you can see, like, this palette has gotten quite a bit of love, but I just don't think the quality is the same as it once was. The shimmers are just pretty lackluster in my opinion at this point, and again, I'm not reaching into this palette for the mattes because I'm not typically creating pink toned eyeshadow looks, so never reach into this anymore. This can definitely go. And then the last palette that I'm going to be getting rid of, I was going back and forth on this, but honestly I've maybe used this palette twice since I've purchased this, and I've had this in my collection for at least 2 years, I believe. And this is the Morphe 3502 palette. This is what it looks like. My daughter's gotten into this, so if you see like some fingery draggy lines, that's what this is. I just don't really care for Morphe eyeshadows. I do really like my Jaclyn Hill 35 pan eyeshadow palette, but aside from that, I just don't love the Morphe eyeshadow formula. Honestly, this isn't a boring palette, but like the majority of these colors I have in almost every other eyeshadow palette. I mean, it's just pretty much neutral browns with a few pops of like bright orange, which I don't even feel like I necessarily need, and I'm sure I have a couple bright oranges in my collection elsewhere. So I also just don't really care for huge eyeshadow palettes. I believe I still have one large Morphe palette that I'm keeping in my collection. It's the Artistry palette, and then I also have my original Jaclyn Hill, the 35 pan first collaboration that she did. So I have those two, but those are going to be the two largest palettes that I currently have in my collection. And aside from that, I just don't really care for these like jumbo palettes. So I am going to be decluttering this. And after that, those are the 10 eyeshadow palettes that I am going to be decluttering from my collection. I wasn't trying to like just choose 10. Honestly, I had 9, and then I decided to declutter that Morphe one because I was like, oh, let's see if I can make it an even 10. But honestly, looking at my eyeshadow palette collection, there's really not a whole else that I would feel comfortable getting rid of at this time. I think part of it is because I've pretty much paid for every palette in my collection, so there's like that part of me that knows how much money I've spent on my collection. But I do really like a lot of the eyeshadow palettes that now live in my collection permanently. Eyeshadow is one of my favorite like steps in the makeup routine, so I really only had 10 that I felt like I knew for sure like I didn't care if I got rid of, and those were the 10 that I shared with you guys today. Let me know in the comments below what palettes you've decluttered this year. I would love to hear from you guys. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch this video, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye.